In the shadowy corridors of 16th century France, they whispered her name with equal parts fear and fascination. The Italian woman who brought poison to the French court, who consulted with astrologers and alchemists, who orchestrated the deaths of thousands in a single night of blood. Was Catherine de Medici the most cunning politician of her age, or the deadliest queen in European history? Tonight we descend into the dark heart of Renaissance intrigue to uncover the truth behind the Poison Queen. She arrived in France as a 14-year-old bride, carrying secrets in her blood and poison in her dowry. Catherine de Medici. The name itself would become synonymous with political murder and royal conspiracy. Born in Florence in 1519, she was the last legitimate heir of the powerful Medici banking dynasty. But the Medicis were more than merchants. They were patrons of the dark arts, collectors of forbidden knowledge, masters of assassination disguised as accident. Catherine's education began early. While other noble girls learned embroidery and music, she studied the properties of herbs that heal and herbs that kill. The Medici palace contained the most extensive collection of poisons in Renaissance Europe. Young Catherine absorbed these lessons like a sponge soaking up blood. When she married the future Henry II of France, she brought more than just political alliance. She brought the Medici methods, the Italian way of removing obstacles permanently and quietly. But for the first 10 years of her marriage, Catherine remained barren, childless. In Renaissance politics, a queen who couldn't produce heirs was a queen with no power. Desperate, she turned to the one realm where Italian knowledge surpassed French, the occult. Catherine began consulting astrologers, alchemists, anyone who claimed to peer beyond the veil of the natural world. Among them, she found a man whose prophecies would haunt her for the rest of her life, Michel de Nostradamus. Nostradamus, the famous prophet, became Catherine's personal advisor, predicting the births of her children, the death of her husband, and the bloody civil wars that would consume France. But perhaps his most chilling prediction concerned Catherine herself, that she would rule France through blood and shadow, outliving her husband and all her sons. When Catherine finally began bearing children, 10 in total, she believed Nostradamus had unlocked some cosmic secret. But every birth brought her closer to the prophet's darkest predictions. Henry II's death in 1559 transformed Catherine from powerless queen consort to France's shadow ruler. A jousting accident, they called it officially. A lance through the eye, purely accidental. But those who knew Catherine whispered darker theories. With Henry dead, Catherine's 15-year-old son Francis became king, with Catherine as regent. For the first time in her life, she held real power, and she intended to keep it by any means necessary. Catherine established what historians would later call her poison cabinet, a secret laboratory hidden within the Louvre Palace. Here, Italian alchemists in her employ perfected the art of murder disguised as natural death. The methods were elegant in their horror. Poisoned gloves that absorbed through the skin, perfumed letters that killed when opened, cosmetics that promised beauty but delivered death. These weren't crude assassinations. They were masterpieces of deception. René de Birague, her personal perfumer, became her most trusted accomplice. Ostensibly, he created scents and cosmetics for the French court. In reality, he manufactured death in crystalline powder and liquid form. The deaths began subtly. Political opponents succumbed to sudden illnesses. Rival courtiers suffered mysterious accidents. Anyone who threatened Catherine's position seemed cursed by fate itself. But Catherine's most infamous alleged victim was Jeanne d'Albret, Queen of Navarre. Jeanne opposed Catherine's plan to marry her son Henry of Navarre to Catherine's daughter Marguerite. The marriage was crucial to Catherine's vision of religious unity in France. Jeanne died suddenly in Paris, just days after examining perfumed gloves gifted by Catherine's agent. The official cause, natural illness. The whispered truth, poison absorbed through the skin during her inspection of the gloves. With Jeanne dead, Nothing stood between Catherine and the political marriage she demanded. The wedding of Henry of Navarre to Marguerite de Valois in August 1572 brought thousands of Protestant nobles to Catholic Paris. They came to celebrate. They would leave in coffins. Catherine had spent years watching France tear itself apart in religious civil wars between Catholics and Protestant Huguenots. She saw these conflicts as threats to royal authority, her authority. The solution in Catherine's mind was elegantly simple: eliminate the Protestant leadership in a single stroke. What followed became known as the St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre. On August 24th, 1572, at Catherine's signal, Catholic mobs began slaughtering Protestant guests throughout Paris. The killing lasted for days. Bodies floated down the Seine River like autumn leaves. Entire families were butchered in their beds. Children were torn from their mothers' arms and murdered in the streets. Contemporary accounts describe Catherine walking through the Louvre's blood-stained corridors, examining the corpses of Protestant nobles with the calm satisfaction of a collector surveying her acquisitions. When asked to justify the massacre, Catherine's response revealed the cold calculation behind her brutality. Better to cut off a gangrenous limb than let it poison the entire body. But the massacre backfired spectacularly. Instead of ending France's religious wars, it intensified them. Instead of consolidating royal power, it weakened the monarchy's moral authority for generations. Catherine had proven she possessed the will to commit mass murder. But she had also proven that even the most ruthless political calculations can produce catastrophic, unintended consequences. By 1574, Catherine had buried her husband and two of her sons who served as kings. Just as Nostradamus predicted, she was the eternal survivor, ruling France through a succession of weak male heirs. Her third son, Henry III, became king, but Catherine remained the real power behind the throne. She had perfected the art of ruling through fear, manipulation, and strategic elimination of obstacles. But Catherine's greatest challenge came from within her own family. Her daughter-in-law, Louise de Lorraine, represented everything Catherine despised: foreign influence, independent thinking, and potential rivalry for Henry III's affections. Louise began experiencing mysterious illnesses shortly after her marriage to Henry III. Stomach ailments, skin rashes, hair loss, symptoms that modern toxicologists recognize as consistent with chronic arsenic poisoning. Louise's personal physician, secretly in Catherine's employ, prescribed medicinal treatments that seemed to worsen rather than improve his patient's condition. The young queen grew weaker with each passing month. But Louise possessed something Catherine hadn't anticipated: allies willing to risk their lives to save her. A network of loyal servants began testing Louise's food, examining her cosmetics, even analyzing the very air in her chambers. When Louise's protectors discovered mercury compounds in her face powder and lead acetate in her wine, they confronted Catherine directly. The accusation was treason. The evidence was overwhelming. Catherine's response was characteristically cold. Prove it. In Renaissance France, accusing the Queen Mother of attempted murder required evidence that could withstand royal scrutiny. Witnesses could be bought, documents could be forged, evidence could disappear. Louise survived, but only because her supporters removed her from Catherine's direct influence. The message was clear: even queens were not safe from the poison queen's reach. As Catherine entered her 70s, age began accomplishing what no enemy had managed. It was slowly killing the woman who had poisoned her way to power. But even facing her own mortality, Catherine continued consulting Nostradamus' successor, Cosimo Ruggieri, an Italian astrologer who had inherited both his predecessor's prophetic abilities and his dangerous knowledge of Catherine's secrets. Ruggieri delivered a final prophecy that terrified Catherine more than any earthly threat. Her dynasty would end with her sons. The Valois line would die out, leaving France to foreign rulers. Catherine raged against this prediction. She had sacrificed everything: her conscience, her soul, thousands of innocent lives, to secure her family's grip on power. The idea that it would all prove temporary was unthinkable. But Nostradamus had never been wrong, and neither, it seemed, was his successor. In her final years, Catherine became increasingly paranoid, convinced that enemies were using her own methods against her. She refused to eat food she hadn't watched being prepared. She changed sleeping chambers nightly. She tested every cosmetic, every perfume, every gift with increasing desperation. The woman who had lived by poison now died fearing it. When Catherine de Medici finally succumbed in 1589, officially from natural causes, few mourned her passing. But many wondered, had someone finally succeeded in giving the Poison Queen a taste of her own medicine? Catherine de Medici's death marked the end of an era, but her methods outlived her by centuries. The political techniques she perfected, assassination disguised as accident, psychological warfare through fear, the strategic elimination of rivals, became standard tools of European statecraft. Her influence extended far beyond France. Italian poison makers found employment in courts across Europe. Her techniques were copied by ambitious queens and ruthless kings who saw in Catherine a model of how absolute power could be achieved and maintained. But perhaps Catherine's most lasting legacy was psychological. She proved that political power had no gender limitations. Women could be just as ruthless, calculating, and effective as their male counterparts when given the opportunity. Modern historians debate whether Catherine was responding to the constraints placed on female rulers, or whether she was simply a sociopath who happened to be born into royalty. The truth probably contains elements of both interpretations. What remains indisputable is Catherine's effectiveness. She ruled France for 30 years through 5 different kings. She survived religious civil wars, foreign invasions, palace coups, and family betrayals that destroyed lesser rulers. She achieved something unprecedented in medieval and Renaissance politics. A woman exercising absolute power not as a temporary regent, but as a permanent shadow monarch. 6 centuries have passed since Catherine de Medici walked the corridors of the Louvre, her silk skirts rustling with secrets and her perfumed gloves hiding death itself. History remembers her as the Poison Queen, the Italian sorceress who brought dark arts to the French court. We recall the massacres, the alleged murders, the ruthless political calculations that left thousands dead in her wake. But perhaps we've missed the most chilling aspect of Catherine's story. She wasn't a monster, she wasn't insane, she was logical. Every decision Catherine made, every poison administered, every rival eliminated, every massacre orchestrated, served a rational political purpose. She wasn't killing for pleasure or revenge. She was killing for power, stability, and dynastic survival. In her mind, a few strategic deaths prevented larger wars. Targeted assassinations maintained the peace. Mass murder preserved the monarchy. Catherine de Medici forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth about power. Sometimes the most effective rulers are those willing to pay moral prices the rest of us couldn't even contemplate. So I ask you this, was Catherine de Medici a necessary evil who saved France from chaos? Or was she simply evil, period? The answer might depend on whether you were her ally or her victim. What do you think? Share your thoughts in the comments below and subscribe for more journeys into the darkest corners of royal history.